Hi there, Steve Kaufman here to talk about languages, and today I'm going to talk about grammar errors. We all like to speak as well as we possibly can. We like to pronounce as close to the native pronunciation as we can, and we would like to make as few errors as possible. However, in reality, in speaking a foreign language, it's quite normal not to pronounce quite like the native. The main thing is that we are understood. And it's quite normal to make grammar errors or errors of usage. And here again, the main emphasis should be on being understood. I deal with a lot of non-native speakers of English, have dealt with in business, and I never worry about their grammar. Even though there are certain mistakes that they always make, even people who are very fluent. I've often used the example of German speakers who say, I have lived in Canada since many years, where in fact it's for many years. Swedish people who say, it is many people in China instead of there are. And typically these are things that reflect the structures in their language, and yet those people are very, very fluent speakers of English, have a large vocabulary, and communicate very comfortably. However, we would all like to do better, always. Or at least, let's put it this way. Those who would like to improve their grammar, what can they do? So, I think one of the biggest problems with grammar is all of the terms that are used, which contribute more to confusion than to anything else. Because if for example, of the languages that I speak the best, which is in order, French, Japanese, and Mandarin, and I can throw maybe Spanish and German in there, Swedish, I really don't think about grammar at all. Now, French I do, because we had so much French at school. So we were told, for example, I still remember in grade 2 or 3, there are 16 verbs that take être as the auxiliary verb, and we had to recite them in class. But when I speak normally, I can't go through those 16 verbs to find out if descendre, to go down, is one of the 16 verbs that takes the auxiliary verb être. I have to get to a point where I naturally say, je suis descendu. So, the key thing, and of course in Japanese and Mandarin, which I speak quite well, and where I have done a lot of reading and listening and speaking, I have no sense of the grammar at all. None, zero. I have learned those languages strictly through massive reading and listening and then eventually speaking. So I was very surprised the other day to see a tweet about intransitive verbs in Japanese. I had never heard of such a term in Japanese. And even the term intransitive and transitive verbs is kind of confusing. It doesn't help people. I am sure that all the people who had grammar at school in English, people like non-native speakers of English who studied English, they were taught about transitive and intransitive verbs. And yet so many people, why is it I hear you, but I listen to you? Knowing that one is transitive, intransitive is not going to help you. You have to get used to the idea that with the word hear comes you. I hear him, I hear you. With the word listen, you can't listen him. You have to listen to him. Or I can't say you, I say to you. And so we have to get used to those structures as part of phrases. I often use the example of the third person singular of the present tense in English. Everybody knows that the third person singular of the present tense has an S, and none of the other forms of the verb have an S. And yet it is such a common mistake. He, go, even native speakers, particularly if the phrase that comes before it, it's a bit confusing as to which noun governs the verb. So we have to get used to these things as phrases. And therefore, in order to get better at grammar, and I prefer the word usage, because when I was tutoring English at Link, what I found was, and we had a system there where we had to identify the type of mistake that the person made. Was it singular, plural? Was it, tense and so forth? by far the biggest problem was word usage. People don't have a sufficient sense of what words mean and which words they are used with, together with, in combination with. And so, for example, very common for people to say, I am very interesting in movies instead of interested. Now you can get into all kinds of terms of gerunds and participles or whatever. It's not going to help. The person has to, and I'll get into what I do, but they have to get used to the ideas I'm interested in. That's a phrase. I'm interested in music, I'm interested in art, I'm interested in literature, I'm excited about the game tomorrow, I'm not exciting about the game. And there are many, many more examples like that. So many people, particularly Chinese people, Japanese people, even I work hard, I won't succeed. Even though, okay, throwing a grammatical term at that is not going to help. People have to focus on it. That's why, say, in my own case, say, Slavic case endings, I just have to save the phrases, say, in link, focus on those phrases. Here's how, very often the preposition will determine the case, or certain verbs determine the case. And so I have to highlight those. If I'm reading in a book, I underline them. If I'm listening, I listen for it. And slowly, with enough exposure to the language through listening and reading, and I might add, eventually you have to speak and you have to use the words. I often say, when I'm starting in a language, I do a lot of listening and reading to build up my vocabulary, and I'm approaching 3,000 words in Arabic, so I'll soon have to start speaking, ugh, but, not ugh, I'm looking forward to it, but you have to start using it and making mistakes, and get the mistakes corrected, and you'll make the mistake again, and slowly the brain gets used to the structure, the usage in the language. And all of our brains are capable of learning and acquiring the language in this way. Not all of us can understand the grammatical terms, the grammatical explanations. Not all of us want to do the drills. But if we expose ourselves to enough of the content, and if we want to improve, and very often, first of all, let me say, so when I start speaking with a tutor at Link, I get back a report with 10, 15 phrases where I made a mistake. So I then import these and I study these phrases, and very likely the next 3 or 4 times, at least from my own experience, that I speak with a tutor, I will make the same mistake again. And I'll get it corrected again. But over time, gradually, I'll start, improving with regard to these structures. But I also notice other structures if I'm attentive to the language, if I'm doing enough listening and reading. And so gradually, my usage, my word usage, my accuracy in terms of using the structures of the language will improve. And so rather than relying on grammatical terms and grammatical explanations, the issue is, here's how we say this in, say, English, which is my language, or whatever your language happens to be. This is how we say this in my language. Here's how they say it in the language that I am learning. So this structure or this phrase equals this phrase. And so gradually, as you're listening to content and reading and making meaning of it, and starting to rely on the structures of the language you are learning, the brain is slowly getting used to it. And so I think with regard to grammar errors, in fact, there's all kinds of research that shows that correcting doesn't change things. I have some difficulty with this because corrections is one of the ways in which you start to notice what's happening in the language. It doesn't correct you overnight, and you need to be corrected many, many times, but it's part of what helps you notice. Massive exposure helps you notice. Wanting to notice helps you notice. Also, we are often aware of which structures we feel less confident about. And so therefore we try, when we see them, we underline them and we try to focus on them. So with regard to grammar errors, then, to summarize, I wouldn't be too worried about making grammar errors if the main goal is to communicate. Obviously, if you are writing on behalf of a company, then you don't want to make errors. It looks silly if some official, letter, like the White House, where there are errors. But If it's just communication, the odd error shouldn't make you tongue-tied or worried, just as your pronunciation needn't be perfect. However, we all strive to improve, and so therefore you should have a strategy which doesn't rely on grammar correction, but does accept correction as a step towards noticing better. You shouldn't rely on reading grammatical explanations, but sometimes reviewing a small grammar book can be helpful, not for the grammatical terms, but because you see examples there of what is correct usage in that language. And build up your vocabulary. If you do a lot of reading, you will get a better and better sense of how words are used, what the scope of meaning of words is, which words they're used together with, all of this kind of thing, and your brain will gradually get used to the language. But there are no shortcuts. You have to engage with the language. So there you have it, grammar errors. Bye for now.